I thought it would be interesting to analyse this image because there's more to it than meets the eye. New Brighton Pier in my hometown of Christchurch is a bit of a magnet for photographers. Something about the simple architecture out over the sea and the human figures that give it scale. I've been out there many times myself to photograph with different ideas and in different weather and sea conditions. It's so changeable, it is definitely a place to return to more than once. And therein lies the challenge as a photographer. How do I photograph it differently to what has been done before and what I've done before? So what's unique about this image? I don't know when I first thought of it, but I wondered if I could photograph the sun rising out over the end of the pier. I looked at some planning apps and worked out that there would be 2 short periods in the year when the sun would rise directly over the end of the pier. And then I might have a window of about a week when the lineup of everything would look really good. So I put a reminder in my diary and waited, but things are never quite as simple as they seem. On my first attempt, I got the days wrong and was already too late, so another 6 months to wait. Then on the next attempt, it was overcast with no sunrise to speak of. Finally, I got my day when everything came together. Looking back over the captures from that morning, I note that I took a lot of shots. Obviously I was a bit nervous about missing the moment and having to wait another 6 months to get another attempt. I originally stitched the images together in a program called AutoPano Giga, a software that's no longer in development, but it's still quite effective and now it's offered as a free download, so see the link in the description if you're interested. My original Photoshop file has 13 layers, but I want to see if I can process this image entirely within Lightroom, rather than the original Lightroom AutoPano Giga Photoshop workflow, and also see if I can improve on the rendering of the image. So let's jump into Lightroom and see what we can do. I can see from the metadata that the images are captured with a 24mm tilt shift lens. I can also see that they've been shot vertically and that I've rotated the shift dial of the lens to the extreme left, the middle and the extreme right for 3 exposures. This is a specialized trick for the tilt shift lens that allows you to get a wider field of view than you'd normally get while still keeping all your vertical and horizontal lines straight. I can also see from the metadata that I've bracketed the exposures at 1/10 and 1/40 of a second. It is possible that the Canon camera I was using didn't have auto bracketing. These days I would nearly always shoot an auto bracket of 3 exposures 2 stops apart on the Sony Alpha cameras I'm using. So I've selected the 6 images I want to merge. I right click on one and go down to Photomerge, Panorama. Lightroom recognizes that these are bracketed exposures and rightly asks if I want to merge to a high dynamic range panorama. I OK that because I want to incorporate the bracketed exposures into the panorama. The images open in the Photomerge screen. I select cylindrical for the merge algorithm and fill edges to fill in the slight uneven border that the stitching has produced. Lightroom does its magic and in a few seconds we have the merged HDR panorama. I can demonstrate the usefulness of having chosen the high dynamic range option by selecting the merged HDR panorama and the unprocessed raw capture, the lighter of the 2 exposures I captured. The first thing to note is that the high dynamic range image has a wider exposure range, -10 to +10, compared to -5 to +5 on the non-HDR file. If I take the highlight slider all the way to -100 on both the HDR image and the non-HDR image, we should be able to highlight the effectiveness of the high dynamic range image. With both images selected, I press the C key to take me into compare mode, and you can clearly see the clipping of the highlight data around the sun is much worse on the non-HDR image. So that's why we use high dynamic range, especially for images that are shot into the sun. So let's tonal adjust this image. I'll use the global adjustment sliders first to get the image looking good overall. It's mainly the top group of sliders from exposure down to blacks that I'm interested in. Once I'm happy with those, I'll try the color temperature slider to make sure I've got the right balance between warm sun and cool blue sky. Now to try some local adjustments. I'm going to see if it's worth boosting the contrast in the sky to bring out the clouds a bit and maybe accentuating the brightness and the warmth of the sun. I click on the mask button and then the sky mask icon. I'm going to try a combination of contrast and clarity to boost the sky area. And I may need to pull back on the saturation a bit if it's starting to look a bit over-saturated. The next mask to look at is to accentuate the sun brightness. I select an oval mask and make sure the softness is set at the maximum. Then it's a matter of jumping between exposure, highlights and temperature sliders until I find I have the right balance. The final touch is to adjust the amount slider at the top, as I find I often want to pull back a bit on the adjustments so they're not too obvious. I can also do this process for the sky mask. And lastly, I go back to the global adjustments and see if the overall brightness and color are about right. So now to compare this recent rendering with my processing from several years ago. Here's both images in compare mode. I can see in the original rendering I have switched the lights back on. I'd need to do that in Photoshop if I wanted to accomplish it in the new image. I had also removed some people in the bottom left of the original image. I could do this in Lightroom, but it would be an easier thing to accomplish in Photoshop. So overall, I don't think I've improved much on the original rendering, although I do think the gradation of the bright sun blending into the darker sky is nicer in the new image. So there you have it. It took a few attempts, but I'm glad I persevered because I got an image that I'm really happy with. And the chances of me getting this shot without the planning, persistence and preparation that went into it are pretty slim. The thing to remember about planning is that sometimes nothing goes to plan, but having a plan is better than no plan at all. Adapt, learn, reschedule. It's all part of the process of photography. And we love the process, right? Now, what would be amazing is if I could just arrange a moonrise directly over the end of New Brighton Pier. I wonder if that's possible. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.